When I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the Northgate County Courthouse, my mother immediately rolled her eyes like I was a piece of clutter in her schedule. My father offered a faint, nasty smirk, the kind that promised I'd be crushed publicly, but the only person who couldn't keep up the act was the judge. He stared at me, froze, gripped the file, and then spoke a single sentence that silenced the entire courtroom. In that moment, I realized they had absolutely no idea who I had become or what awaited them when the truth was finally put on the table. The early morning in Riversend, Oregon, was a study in unforgiving gray. Rain had just stopped, leaving the pavement outside the Northgate County Superior Court slick and reflecting the sickly neon glow of news vans lined up along the curb. This was not the kind of weather you wanted for a $14 million inheritance dispute, but then again, nothing about this day had been what I wanted. My name is Madeline Hart, and I had spent the last 3 years in the very building I was now approaching. But I was always walking in through the employee entrance, clutching case files, not ducking a forest of microphones. The moment the black SUV I was in braked, the world outside exploded. Madeline Hart, is it true you manipulated your grandfather? Miss Hart, why are your own parents suing you? Is this about the full 75% control of the Silvercrest Foundation? The camera clicks were a physical assault, a frantic, desperate rhythm that made my teeth ache. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the clammy Oregon air filling my lungs, my heart, usually a steady professional drumbeat, was hammering hard against my ribs, a trapped animal desperate for freedom. My hands, cold and bloodless despite the warmth of the car, were clamped around the worn manila folder. It didn't contain my case notes. It contained the last letter Judge Samuel Archer ever wrote to me, and holding it was the only thing keeping my composure from fracturing. Rowan Blake, my lawyer and former law professor, a sharp, elegantly intimidating woman with a silver braid, gave me a curt nod. Head up, Maddie. Don't speak. Don't flinch. I pushed through the revolving door into the sterile quiet of the courthouse lobby, shedding the reporter's questions like a thick, heavy cloak, but the true confrontation was waiting on the second floor. When I entered courtroom number 3, the air shifted from cold tension to a dry, theatrical heat. The room was packed. Rows of local reporters, curious socialites, and several old colleagues from the district attorney's office who had come to watch the show. At the plaintiff's table, the table where I usually sat, were Elaine and Daniel Hartley, my parents. My mother, Elaine, was wearing a custom-made, $2,000 suit in a shade of pale blue designed to invoke innocence and victimhood. The instant her gaze locked onto me, she performed a slow, dramatic eye roll. It wasn't just contempt. It was a practiced dismissal, the kind of gesture that said, "You are an inconvenience, and this entire spectacle is beneath me." My father, Daniel, the aspiring state senator whose entire career was built on the shaky foundation of his inherited name and my mother's real estate network, offered that faint, nasty smirk I knew so well. It was the look of a man entirely comfortable with the narrative he'd paid to construct, the dutiful, heartbroken parents versus the greedy, manipulative granddaughter. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, looking like he was settling in for a particularly satisfying boxing match. Their lawyer, Carter Lowell, the very man I'd eviscerated in a complex securities fraud case only 18 months ago, radiated confidence. He was all polished mahogany and expensive cologne, a perfect foil to Rowan Blake, who sat next to me. Rowan, dressed in quiet, powerful charcoal gray, was unnervingly calm. She didn't fidget. She didn't shuffle papers. She just watched the room, her expression suggesting she wasn't anxious about the fight, but rather savoring the first, perfect moment of the kill. She seemed to have been waiting for this exact minute, this exact convergence of people. Then, the clerk called the case, and everyone rose. Judge Jeremiah Cole entered. Judge Cole was a tall man, nearing his early 60s, with a reputation for both a laser-sharp legal mind and an unshakable moral compass, qualities my father often publicly praised and privately loathed. He settled onto the bench, the physical height of his seat suddenly amplifying the power he held. He picked up the massive case file, the one detailing the entire history of Samuel Archer's vast estate and last will and testament. He began to flip through the preliminary filings, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room became absolute. He reached the front page, where the names of the plaintiffs and the defendant were listed. I watched his eyes track the page. Then, his motion stopped entirely. His hand, which had been turning the thick paper, froze. He lifted his gaze from the file. A slight hesitation, a micro-expression of something I couldn't immediately place, and looked directly at me. His eyes were clear, intelligent, and held a depth of scrutiny that went beyond standard judicial procedure. He licked his lips and slowly, deliberately, repeated the name he saw on the paper. Madeline Elise Hart. He paused, the tension in his voice creating a vacuum in the room. Are you the defendant in this case? The entire courtroom choked on the silence. It was not the question that mattered. It was the way he asked it, the slow, personal gravity of it. It was a question asked by a man who didn't just recognize the name on the legal docket, but the person it belonged to. A wave of hushed whispers immediately broke loose. It was a cascade of low, feverish commentary spreading through the spectator rows, the kind of privileged gossip that kills careers in Riversend. Isn't she the one who inherited the whole thing? Judge Archer's granddaughter? She's a prosecutor, right? The one who put away Senator Thorne's campaign manager? Why is she being sued by her own parents over all that money? I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Cole. My composure was tight, my spine ramrod straight, but internally, a deep, unsettling feeling began to rise. It was a collision of past and present, a familiarity that had no business being here. Judge Cole's gaze felt like a key turning in a lock I thought I'd sealed 2 decades ago. I knew why the courtroom was so rapt, why this $14 million suit was the headline. It wasn't about the money, it was about the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of the Hartleys, Daniel and Elaine, suing the daughter they abandoned, over the inheritance from the man they neglected. It was a spectacular public display of entitlement, banking on the idea that my status as a prosecutor would be spun against me, framing me as the manipulative professional, the one with the legal know-how to steal a fortune. This wasn't just a probate dispute. This was the first trial of my life where I was not standing at the clean, ethical table of the district attorney's office. I was standing alone, as the accused, facing the 2 people who had given me life and then sold my existence for political currency. And in that long, suspended moment, as Judge Cole continued to look at me, the silence stretching like a drawn bowstring, I realized the true jeopardy of the day. They didn't know I had changed the rules, and they certainly didn't know that Judge Jeremiah Cole, the man who held the power of judgment over us all, was not just reading a file. He had been there, somewhere in the periphery, when my parents first sealed their fate, burying the truth about their choices and about the quiet dignity of Samuel Archer, the man they had scorned for so long. The past was not returning. It was here, sitting on the bench, and it was about to speak for the dead. The courtroom faded, the sharp smell of the aged paper in my hand, the oppressive formality of the wood paneling, the accusing smirk of my father, all of it dissolved into a soundless, sun-drenched memory. I was back in Riversend Heights, the exclusive neighborhood of glass and steel monstrosities where I was born into the Hartley family image. On the surface, we were the postcard of American success. My father, Daniel, was the fast-rising political star, always in immaculate Italian suits, his smile perfectly calibrated for the camera lens. My mother, Elaine, was the powerhouse real estate entrepreneur, impeccably styled, selling the American dream, one $5 million property at a time. We looked spectacular on the cover of Riversend Living, the polished family unit, but behind the imported velvet ropes of our lives, the reality was a silent, chilling absence. I wasn't hurt by rage or by physical hands. I was harmed by neglect, a form of emotional starvation more insidious than any visible wound. I was the child who always had a state-of-the-art playroom, but was never played with. My parents didn't abuse me. They outsourced me. The revolving door of my early childhood was filled with people whose job description was simply replace the parents. There was Maria, the sweet nanny who taught me to tie my shoes, who left after 6 months because she asked my mother for one weekend off, then the prestigious $2,000 a month preschool. Later, the boarding school where I only came home for 4-day holidays, then the private tutor, Mr. Vance, whose only instruction from my parents was, keep her quiet and keep her grades at an A+. My earliest memory of a significant family event is not a shared meal or a hug. It's a Christmas Eve. I must have been about 6 or 7. Our living room in Riversend Heights was a testament to excess. A 20-foot fir tree covered in designer ornaments. A sea of perfectly wrapped gifts beneath it. I remember sitting cross-legged on the cold marble floor, long after the hired help had left and the house lights had been dimmed for the night. The presents remained unopened. The spectacular tree stood silent. The only illumination came from the enormous flat-screen television across the room, which was running a news loop. My father, beaming, was on the screen, cutting the ribbon on a new upscale shopping center. A political victory. A photo op deemed more important than his own daughter on Christmas Eve. He hadn't come home until I was asleep, and my mother was with him at the ribbon cutting. To Elaine, the family was her most valuable brand. Every interaction with me was framed as a project. Madeline, wear this dress. It coordinates with the lighting. Smile like this, sweetie. It shows sincerity to the cameras. She never asked what I wanted, what I thought, or what my dreams were. She only measured me against the perfection of the image she was selling to the public. My existence was a tool for her political and professional advancement, a beautiful prop in a very expensive stage play. And Daniel? Whenever I had a difficult question, a moment of confusion, or a simple curiosity, like why we had 3 identical Mercedes in the garage, he would dismiss me with the same infuriating phrase, "When you're older, you'll understand." He never sat down, never explained, never offered the clarity or comfort a father should. The understanding was always conditional, always deferred to a future where, presumably, I would be less inconvenient and more useful. The true inflection point came when I was 8 years old. It was mid-August. The city heat was suffocating, and the political campaign for Daniel's state assembly seat was heating up even faster. One morning, my mother's assistant, a perpetually stressed woman named Chloe, packed a single, monogrammed leather suitcase for me. My mother appeared for precisely 3 minutes in the foyer, her face tight with forced cheerfulness. "Daddy and I are just too busy with the campaign. Sweetheart, it's a crucial time. We're sending you for a wonderful temporary visit to Judge Archer, your grandfather. Remember? Up in Silvercrest Ridge, fresh air, wide open spaces, just for a bit, until things settle down." I didn't cry. I was too conditioned for disappointment. I just nodded, accepted the polite kiss on the forehead, and was handed off to a driver. It wasn't until I was much older, a prosecutor myself, that I realized the cold, legal precision of the word they used, temporary. The journey took about 4 hours, trading the polished urban sprawl of Riversend for the damp, pine-scented wildness of the Silvercrest Mountains. Judge Samuel Archer's house was the antithesis of the Hartley's sleek, hyper-modern cage. It was a proper cabin, built of dark, honest timber, smelling perpetually of fireplace smoke, damp earth, and thousands of leather-bound books. The windows were small, but they looked out onto an untamed, expansive forest. Instead of the jarring ring of cell phones and the hum of air conditioning, there was the silence of the mountains, broken only by the crackle of a radio playing old-school jazz and the rustle of turning pages. Samuel Archer was not a man of grand gestures. He never demanded I be nice or well-behaved. The first evening I arrived, he sat me down at his old wooden kitchen table, gave me a cup of warm milk, And instead of asking about my school or my parents, he simply asked, "What did you learn about people today?" That was his philosophy. He didn't care about grades or social performance. He cared about insight and integrity. He taught me to look at the world through a dual lens, the lens of law, which seeks evidence, and the lens of ethics, which seeks the soul. It took time, but the truth slowly dawned on me, not through tears, but through cold, logical observation. I wasn't sent away because they were too busy. I was sent away because my 8-year-old existence, my need for actual parenting, my simple presence, was a flaw in the perfect, sellable backdrop of the Hartleys' lives. I complicated the narrative. I was a loose thread they couldn't control. The final, definitive realization came late one night, about 3 weeks after I moved to Silvercrest. I was supposed to be asleep, but the jazz radio was too loud in the hallway. I crept to the top of the stairs and heard Judge Archer talking in hushed tones on the downstairs landline. "Elaine, he's fine. He's not going to suddenly get sick from the mountain air. He's happy." Then, the tone of the voice on the other end, my mother's voice, sharp and icy, cut through the phone line. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I heard Samuel's devastating reply, his voice dropping to a low, weary rumble. "Look, you know the arrangement. If you keep her here, your father will continue to transfer funds monthly. It's part of the agreement. Elaine, stop pretending you care about her health and start being honest about what you care about." The sentence hit me with the quiet, crushing force of a truth that changes everything. Keep her here. Your father will continue to transfer funds regularly. I wasn't their daughter who needed caring for. I was a condition, a variable in a financial agreement, a clause in a contract. My father's campaign, my mother's real estate empire, the 3 Mercedes, all of it was being fueled, in part, by the money flowing from Judge Archer to ensure I stayed out of sight. Fulfilling the role of the discreet granddaughter, I retreated to my room, not weeping, but utterly, devastatingly clear-headed. My identity in the Hartley family was not one of flesh and blood, but one of currency, and that knowledge, that cold, hard clarity, was the first, painful seed of the resilience I would carry back into the courtroom decades later. My life in Silvercrest Ridge with Judge Samuel Archer was not a fairy tale, but it was the first time I felt truly seen, not simply displayed. The vast, dusty old cabin became my sanctuary, and Samuel became my quiet, unwavering anchor. The pain of realizing I was a financial variable to my parents was soothed by the fact that to Samuel, I was a mind worth investing in. Our rituals were the bedrock of my new existence. Every Sunday evening, regardless of the weather, we sat at the same scarred, heavy wooden table in his kitchen. We each had a thick ceramic mug, mine with Earl Grey and honey, his with black coffee so strong it could raise the dead. And we talked, not about school, not about chores, but about people. He never lectured. He would recount, in his calm, resonant voice, the details of a case he had presided over maybe 20 or 30 years earlier, a property line dispute, a complex medical malpractice suit, even a seemingly simple misdemeanor. He would lay out the testimony of the witnesses and then ask me, "Maddie, look at the evidence. Now, tell me what the lie is hiding." It was a masterclass in human nature and jurisprudence. He taught me to listen not just to the words, but to the gaps between them. He called it finding the moment of slippage, that microsecond when a person, trying to maintain a facade, lets their true motive or insecurity leak into their body language or a slight linguistic error. If a witness said, "I clearly remember the time was 3:30 p.m., but their eyes flicked quickly to the door," Samuel would point it out. Why the door? They are recalling the clock, but their body recalls the exit. What were they planning to do at 3:30 p.m. instead of what they claim they saw? These weren't just parlor tricks. They were the tools of a seasoned judge who understood that the law, while objective, was administered by deeply flawed subjective beings. These lessons, the relentless analysis of motive and the search for the core truth, would become my strongest weapons in the very courtroom where my parents now sought to destroy me. More importantly, he instilled in me the crucial distinction between legal victory and genuine justice. A good lawyer, he'd tell me, stirring his tea, can argue their way to a win using every loophole in the book. A just person, Maddie, knows that winning fairly sometimes means you have to prove not only that you are right, but that the other side is fundamentally wrong, not just legally, but morally. This concept, the pursuit of real justice over mere win-at-all-costs legal maneuvering, was the moral compass I held, the one that would guide my actions in the coming high-stakes battle. Life continued in that peaceful rhythm until I turned 15. One brisk November morning, I found him slumped slightly over his kitchen table, the Sunday paper still open, his right hand gripping his mug. It was a mild stroke. He was admitted to the Halcyon Judicial Health Institute, a highly exclusive private facility in the neighboring county, reserved only for retired or serving high-ranking judges. It was the best care money could buy, a place where privacy and specialized cognitive testing were paramount. During the entire 3 weeks he was hospitalized. My parents did not visit once. Not a single phone call was made to the hospital administrator by Elaine or Daniel. Instead, every week, without fail, their family lawyer would email Samuel's personal counsel, Maureen Clay, with one consistent, chilling inquiry. Is the judge's financial status stable, and have there been any changes to his investment portfolio? There was never a line, not even a fabricated one, inquiring about his cognitive recovery or his physical health. The stroke, though mild, sobered Samuel profoundly. When he returned home, the Sunday ritual didn't stop, but it gained a new sense of urgency. He spent hours meticulously reviewing documents, cross-referencing bank statements, and checking the deed to the Silvercrest property. One afternoon, I walked into his study to find him sitting at his huge desk, surrounded by stacks of paper. On top was a heavy, aged folder marked Last Will and Testament, Draft 1. Curiosity overcame me. I saw a paragraph concerning the distribution of his estate to my mother, Elaine Hartley, and next to it, a clear, decisive line drawn through the text in red ink. Their names were erased from the provision. I didn't dare ask. The air around the subject was too thick, too painful. But Samuel saw me standing there and slowly pushed the document away. He looked at me with those wise, tired eyes. You saw that, didn't you, Maddie? I nodded. Mute. He sighed. Not everyone who carries the Archer name understands its meaning. Many think it's a key to the best schools and the best offices. He paused, his gaze softening. But you do? You understand that the name is a debt owed to integrity, not to wealth. He didn't say he was cutting them off. He didn't have to. He was simply stating a consequence. A few months later, as I was studying for my final exams at Silvercrest High, Samuel called me into his study again. He placed a slim, unsealed manila envelope on the desk in front of me. It was clean, new, and labeled in his distinct, elegant handwriting, Legacy Plan. This, he said, tapping the envelope lightly, is the other side of the lesson we've been having. It contains the facts, the proof, and the record. He pushed it toward me. Don't open it now. Promise me, Madeline, not until you are absolutely compelled to choose between silence and the truth. Not until your integrity is the only thing you have left. When that moment comes, when they try to rewrite the history we made here, then you look at what's inside. I took the envelope, the paper cool beneath my fingertips, feeling the immense weight of the obligation he was placing on me. It wasn't a gift. It was a charge. From that day forward, my path crystallized. I had always been good at debate, at analysis, at seeing the slippage in people's arguments. I realized I couldn't simply run from my family's shadow. I had to stand up to it. I decided to apply to law school. It wasn't about joining the family legacy like some privileged child fulfilling an obligation. It was about forging my own voice in the courtroom. the very place my grandfather had sat for decades, observing the best and worst of humanity. I wouldn't seek power. I would seek the tools to ensure no one else could be treated like a transactional commodity. On the day I was 17, standing on the humble, patchy lawn of Silvercrest High School, I mailed my applications. My target was the Westlake School of Law, an institution known for its fierce focus on public service and prosecutorial ethics. As I dropped the heavy packet into the blue mailbox, I looked back toward the high, quiet ridges of the Silvercrest Mountains where Samuel's cabin stood. I was stepping onto a path I would have to walk alone, carving out a life defined not by my parents' absence, but by my grandfather's quiet, demanding presence. The battle for the inheritance hadn't even started, but the foundation for the fight, the relentless search for truth, had been securely laid. The years between 17 and 25 were a blur of caffeine, legal briefs, and the relentless, quiet pursuit of excellence. Westlake Law School was everything I'd hoped for: demanding, impersonal, and a world away from the Hartley's Riversend echo chamber. I wasn't the privileged daughter of a political family. I was just Maddie Hart, working 20 hours a week at the law library and surviving on ramen. My defining relationship during that time was with Dr. Rowan Blake, a renowned professor of white-collar crime and prosecutorial ethics. She was the one who saw the ruthless precision in my analytical reports. I started as her research assistant, tracing the tangled financial webs of corporate fraudsters. Rowan wasn't just a mentor. She was the architect who helped me translate Samuel's philosophical lessons into actionable legal strategy. When I needed an attorney decades later, there was no other choice. After graduating at the top of my class, I did the unthinkable. I returned to Riversend. I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I was looking for a front line. I applied quietly, using my credentials and not my family name, to the Northgate County District Attorney's Office. My application stood out, not because of pedigree, but because of my unique thesis on forensic accounting and public corruption cases. I was hired almost immediately, slotting into the complex fraud division. My parents, of course, had no idea I was back in town, let alone working 3 blocks from Daniel's main campaign office. They simply assumed I was studying somewhere out of state or working for some large New York firm, vague professional terms that allowed them to maintain the illusion of a successful, if distant, child. They never asked for details. They never asked for my address. They never even asked the name of the agency I worked for. Ignorance was their shield, and it was my opportunity. The first, satisfying twist came barely 6 months into my tenure. The DA's office assigned me as co-counsel on a massive, high-profile case involving a fraudulent stock scheme that targeted elderly investors. I walked into the preliminary hearing and saw the defense counsel at the opposing table. Carter Lowell, the same polished, arrogant lawyer who was now sitting directly across from me in the probate courtroom. Carter represented the corrupt CEO. I was the one who systematically picked apart his financial defense, piece by piece, relying on Samuel's insistence on tracing the money to its most basic, illicit source. The case ended in a spectacular, hard-won conviction. I didn't just win, I won overwhelmingly. Carter Lowell was forced to watch as I, the young, quiet prosecutor he barely noticed, dismantled his entire argument. It was a victory he would certainly remember, and it was a history that would now define our current conflict. The irony of the situation never failed to sting. I was constantly circulating in the same political and legal circles as my parents, yet I remained invisible. At a massive, annual fundraising gala for the state bar, I was standing discreetly by the bar, waiting for my turn to speak with an ethics committee member, when Daniel and Elaine walked past. They were surrounded by photographers and major campaign donors, laughing loudly, their arms linked. My father was pointing out one of his new commercial developments. They looked right through me. The small, professionally dressed young woman holding a glass of sparkling water. I was 2 feet away, a prosecutor in their own county, and they didn't register my existence. I was not part of their curated, camera-ready life, and therefore, I simply did not exist. It was the purest form of abandonment, played out under the glare of 300 chandeliers. Through all of this, the professional climb, the quiet victories, the public invisibility, Samuel remained my only constant. We kept the Sunday ritual, trading the old kitchen table for weekly video calls. He never asked about my parents. He only asked about the cases. Tell me about the human being behind that filing. Maddie, what choice led them to this moment? He insisted I focus on the motive, the why, rather than just the law. Then, during the winter of my 26th year, when a thick crystalline sheet of snow had encased Silvercrest, Samuel's calls stopped for text/$2 days. I drove up immediately, taking 5 hours on treacherous mountain roads, the anxiety a cold knot in my stomach. When I arrived at the cabin, the light was on. Samuel was sitting in his study, looking frail but composed, opposite his longtime personal counsel, Maureen Clay. The air was heavy, charged with the finality of decisions. There was a thick, bound document on the table between them. Samuel looked at me, a flash of deep affection in his eyes. He motioned me to a chair. "Madeline," he said, his voice slow but steady. "Maureen and I have concluded our business. I wanted you here to hear the finality of it." He explained his decision with the judicial precision I knew so well. He was leaving me everything: the Silvercrest property, the entirety of his investment portfolio, and his significant shares in a major community foundation he had helped build. For Elaine and Daniel, there was only one thing: an individual, sealed letter for each of them, to be delivered after his passing. Nothing more. My reaction was immediate: visceral panic. "Grandpa, no, please. They will say I coerced you. They will claim I manipulated the will. I'm a prosecutor in their county. They will tear my career apart and yours with it." The thought of them finally seeing me, but only to accuse me of base greed, was terrifying. Samuel looked sternly at Maureen, then back at me. "Do not fear the consequences of other people's choices. Maddie, what I am doing is not an act of revenge. It is an act of accountability." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the will. "This document is not about punishment. It is the natural consequence of 30 years of choices they have made. They chose currency over kinship. They chose politics over principle. They chose silence over me." He gently tapped the spot where their names were once written. "The only person who truly understands the integrity of the Archer name is the one who was raised by it. This is the truth, Madeline, and the truth needs to be protected, not excused." My hands were shaking as I was asked to sign the new will as a witness. It wasn't the thrill of inheriting millions. It was the sheer, terrifying realization that this piece of paper was not just a legal document. It was a declaration of war. It was the moment that the careful, quiet life I had built to escape their orbit would violently collide with their insatiable entitlement. I knew, with chilling certainty, that this signature was the spark that would ignite the inevitable, brutal conflict. I was about to be dragged back into the Hartley family drama, this time armed with the law and facing the devastating consequences of Samuel's final judgment. The call came on a Tuesday morning, not with the shattering violence of a car crash, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a closing door. I was at my desk at the Northgate DA's office, sifting through the muddy details of an embezzlement case, when my personal line rang. It was Maureen Clay, Samuel's attorney. "Madeline," Maureen's voice was low, professional, yet clearly shaken. "I'm so sorry. Judge Archer passed away this morning." My world instantly muffled, the familiar, frantic sounds of the prosecutor's bullpen, the rhythmic whir of the photocopy machine, the sharp clang of the water cooler, the low murmur of colleagues debating a plea bargain, all receded. I was suspended in a bubble of silence. My hand gripping the phone felt suddenly heavy, anchored only by the weight of Maureen's next words. "He was at Halcyon. After his routine checkup, he went very peacefully, in his sleep." Peacefully. It was a word that felt too small, too clinical. to encompass the loss of the only stable, loving force I had ever known. I sat motionless, staring at the financial report on my screen, the numbers blurring. Samuel was gone. The 30 years of quiet mentorship, the Sunday evening tea, the questions about the human being behind the file, it all ended with a peaceful sleep. I managed a thank you, hung up, and took the rest of the week off, the office's sudden, quiet concern feeling like an unbearable spotlight. The funeral was held on a gray, cool afternoon in the small stone church in Silvercrest. It was a service marked by dignified intimacy, exactly as Samuel would have wanted. The attendees were a tapestry of integrity, a handful of his old colleagues from the bench, several neighbors who remembered him as a generous friend, and about a dozen young law students he had quietly mentored over the years. No major political figures, no sensational headlines, just quiet grief. And then, in the final moments, when the casket was being closed, the spectacle arrived. Elaine and Daniel Hartley entered the church late, sweeping through the back doors like royalty making an appearance. Elaine was cloaked in black mink, a dramatic veil partially obscuring her face, her expression a careful, manufactured blend of shock and sorrow. Daniel, in a custom-tailored morning suit, ushered her towards the front, stopping just long enough to accept a public, camera-ready embrace from a local reporter who was conveniently standing near the entrance. They moved to the side of the casket, Elaine dabbing a dry eye with a pristine lace handkerchief. My mother then ascended the pulpit. She delivered a flawless, tearful oration about the great patriarch who was the moral cornerstone of our family, about the deep spiritual guidance he had given her throughout her life, and about the unbearable loss to the community. I stood in the front row, cold and furious, listening to the polished lies that slipped so easily from her mouth. I knew for a fact, through the same records Samuel had meticulously kept, that she hadn't spoken to him, not truly spoken, without asking about money, in nearly 5 years. Her grief was an act, a theatrical performance designed for the 3 local news cameras at the back of the church. This wasn't mourning, it was damage control for their public narrative. After the burial, everyone migrated to the small, cozy office of Maureen Clay. The mood inside shifted palpably. The collective sorrow of the community gave way to the sharp, focused tension of expectation. This was where the final chapter of Samuel's life and the first chapter of the family war would be read aloud. Maureen, a severe, silver-haired woman with the steady gaze of a notary who has seen every kind of family drama, sat behind her desk. The reading was slow, methodical, the legal language a stark contrast to the heightened emotions in the room. She detailed the full extent of the estate, the quiet, comfortable wealth built on judicial salary, shrewd investments, and the appreciation of the Silvercrest Ridge land. She spoke of the real estate, the investment accounts, the shares in the community trust. Then she read the crucial line, deliberately, leaving no room for misunderstanding. All remaining assets, real and personal property, investments, and controlling shares of the Silvercrest Community Trust are hereby bequeathed to my granddaughter, Madeline Elise Hart. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the room. Elaine made a small, choked sound, but it wasn't grief. It was shock. Daniel's face went rigid. Maureen continued, her voice never wavering. The testator, Samuel Archer, made specific provision for his daughter, Elaine Hartley, and his son-in-law, Daniel Hartley. Each is to receive a personal, sealed letter, delivered at the conclusion of this reading. Maureen handed the 2 pristine, cream-colored envelopes to my parents. They opened them simultaneously. The contents were brief, maybe 3 or 4 sentences, typed. Elaine's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Her face, which had been so carefully composed for the cameras, completely disintegrated. She read the note, crumpled the paper violently in her hand, and let out a strangled, furious cry. Daniel read his face draining of all color, and he quickly folded the paper, shoving it into his inner jacket pocket so fast that the edge of the envelope ripped. the facade shattered. The polite sorrow was replaced by the rage of entitlement denied. Elaine lunged toward Maureen's desk, her voice rising to a shriek. "This is impossible. She poisoned his mind. My father would never disinherit his own daughter. He was confused after the stroke. She manipulated him." Daniel, though calmer, was equally menacing. "Maureen, you are complicit. We demand to see the previous will. We demand the full medical records from Halcyon. We are filing suit. You and your entire legal team will be held responsible for elder abuse and undue influence." They were already using the language of the courtroom, the very charges I had feared. They didn't see the irony. They had come to collect the money they had earned by neglect, and now, denied. They had reverted to their default setting, professional destruction. As the ensuing chaos raged, Maureen calmly calling the building security, Daniel shouting threats about character defamation, I remained seated. I was watching not just my parents, but the complete, ugly unraveling of their entire family myth. They weren't fighting for Samuel. They were fighting for the $14 million that they believed was rightfully theirs. When the Hartleys were finally escorted out of the office, red-faced and vowing immediate legal action, Maureen turned to me. The room was silent once more. Smelling of expensive cologne and cheap legal paper, she held out one final, small envelope. It was brown and ordinary, addressed to me in Samuel's own, recognizable handwriting. "He told me to give you this, Madeline, only when they came back for what they threw away. He said you would know when that time had arrived." I took the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy. My name, written by his hand, seemed to confirm everything. I didn't open it, but as I clutched it, feeling the texture of the thick paper inside, a profound, sickening premonition washed over me. The battle had begun. And the feeling that time, the moment of choosing between Samuel's truth and my own silence, was approaching faster than I could have possibly imagined. The explosion was instantaneous and total. It wasn't a slow-burn rumor. It was a carefully executed media ambush. It took only 3 days after the chaotic will reading for the process server to show up at my small Riversend apartment. I was served with a massive bound complaint. Hartley VC, Hart, my parents, Elaine and Daniel, were the plaintiffs, and I was the defendant. The accusations were not veiled. Undue influence, exploiting an elderly person, and manipulating Samuel Archer into executing a new will. They were leveraging my professional title, the very thing I had worked so hard for, twisting it into evidence of my greed. The document explicitly stated that Madeline Hart, as a prosecutor, possessed the specific legal acumen necessary to coerce Samuel and conceal her actions. By the end of the day, the news was everywhere. The local papers ran banner headlines. Archer estate scandal, mysterious granddaughter sued by parents over fortune, and political candidate Daniel Hartley fights daughter's greed. Social media was a cesspool of judgment. Old, awkward photos of me from Silvercrest High's yearbook were circulating. The narrative was simple, clean, and devastating. Rich granddaughter stabs parents in the back for $14 million. The professional fallout was immediate. The next morning, I was called into a terse, emergency meeting with the district attorney. He was apologetic, but firm. "Maddie, we have to protect the integrity of the office. This is a high-profile civil suit that involves claims of professional misconduct." I was formally placed on unpaid leave until the matter was resolved. It was a professional death sentence disguised as an administrative formality. Suddenly, the people who had admired my sharp legal mind and quiet efficiency developed professional amnesia. Colleagues who had asked me for advice on complex felony cases now averted their eyes in the hallway. The silence was louder than any accusation. A few sent guarded, cryptic texts. "Hang in there. M. Or call me if you need anything, but not from the office." But no one, not one person, dared to publicly suggest that the Hartleys might be the ones lying. In Riversend, you didn't publicly contradict the established political and social elite. My parents' strategy was immediately clear and ruthlessly effective. They had hired Carter Lowell, the man whose face I had made look very foolish in federal court, to handle the litigation, but more strategically, they had brought in a notoriously aggressive PR firm known for reframing the narrative for the ultra-wealthy. The public discussion shifted from the sanctity of a will to a moralistic dissection of my character. Local talk shows and cable news panels picked up the story. The central question posed to the audience wasn't about the law, but about morality. Could a granddaughter, raised comfortably by a wealthy judge, really have destroyed her parents for money? Nobody was asking the obvious counter-question: why did those parents discard their child for text/22 years and then suddenly claim a familial bond only when money was involved? I was overwhelmed, drowning in the public humiliation. But I refused to sink. That's when Rowan Blake stepped in. I saw the complaint. Maddie, Rowan said, sitting across from me in her austere private office. It's a garbage fire of defamation, but the Hartleys are good at setting fires. She pushed a retainer agreement toward me. I'm taking the case, pro bono. I owe it to Samuel. And frankly, I owe it to you. We are not just defending your right to the money. We are defending Samuel's final wishes, his reputation, and the truth of your childhood. With Rowan steering the ship, the process of formal discovery began. It was a massive undertaking. We had to surrender years of documentation. Every mental health assessment Samuel had undergone at Halcyon, the meticulous records of his cognitive checks, every email, every call log. Samuel, the fastidious judge, had knowingly created an ironclad record of his own declining health, or rather, his lack of decline. He had saved everything, seemingly anticipating this very moment. In the mountains of digital and paper files that Samuel had stored for me, I hit the jackpot. I found a hidden, encrypted folder labeled with my childhood nickname. The password was the combination of the year I moved in with him and his favorite Supreme Court case number. Inside, among digitized photos and old financial ledgers, was a collection of secret audio recordings. I listened to the first one, dated from 4 years prior, a quiet phone call between Samuel and Elaine. My mother's voice was detached, flat, immediately launching into a conversation about his brokerage account and the stock market. Samuel attempted to redirect the conversation 3 times. Elaine, how are you? How is your father-in-law's health? And, I saw Daniel's speech. It was quite good. How is he handling the stress? Each time, Elaine smoothly skirted the personal questions and returned to the assets. The final exchange was chilling. Elaine explicitly asked Samuel to transfer a large sum to help Daniel with an unforeseen campaign expense. Samuel gently refused, saying the money was locked into a trust for educational endowments. There were 8 such recordings, spread out over 7 years. Each one proved the same: cold reality. My mother's contact with her father, the man she now publicly mourned, was purely transactional. It was a devastating, irrefutable record of their 30-year-long emotional abandonment. Rowan was ecstatic. This changes everything, Maddie. This takes their entire narrative of a loving daughter betrayed by a confused old man and burns it to the ground. Just when we felt the tide turning, Carter Lowell landed his counterpunch, a preemptive media strike, expertly timed to create maximum doubt before the first hearing. I was watching the 6 o'clock news alone in my apartment when the segment aired. Carter stood on the courthouse steps, looking grave and credible. Our clients, Daniel and Elaine Hartley, have uncovered compelling evidence that proves the defendant, Ms. Hart, took steps to ensure her control over Judge Archer's life. We have documentation showing that Ms. Hart secretly arranged for her grandfather's transfer to a specialized medical facility, Halcyon, a move designed to isolate him from family and administer medication that, we believe, compromised his cognitive capacity and free will to change the will. The words hit me like a physical blow. Halcyon, the best judicial care facility in the state, had been his choice, a place he loved for its intellectual stimulation, not a cage. The claim that I had controlled his medication was a lie, a total fabrication. Yet, Spoken by Carter with such professional gravity, it became the new, toxic headline. My knees felt momentarily weak. I was a prosecutor who understood the difference between truth and accusation, but seeing such a cruel, cynical twist of reality, the suggestion that I had poisoned the one man who loved me, made my certainty waver. It was the hardest push yet. They didn't just want the money, they wanted to erase Samuel's choice by assassinating my character and my integrity, and I realized that the time to open that brown, sealed envelope was now very, very close. The clock was ticking down to the first day of the trial. The tension in Rowan Blake's office was so thick you could almost taste the metallic tang of fear and anticipation. We were operating under a massive shadow cast by Carter Lowell's public claims about Halcyon. Our first line of defense was the medical file. Rowan's team executed an immediate, detailed demand for every record from the Halcyon Judicial Health Institute. What we received was a fortress of scientific proof, report after report, neurological assessments, and quarterly cognitive function videos, all compiled by independent medical experts over 7 years, unanimously confirmed that Judge Archer was more lucid and mentally sharp than most people 20 years his junior. The claim that I had controlled his medication to compromise his free will was scientifically impossible, but we knew that science alone rarely wins a media war. Carter Lowell, in turn, unleashed his key witness. His deposition hit our table like a sledgehammer. The witness was Grant Morrow, a former maintenance worker at the Silvercrest cabin. Grant's testimony was tailor-made for public consumption. He claimed Samuel was prone to fits of confusion, would forget my name, and critically, would sign documents without reading them, especially in the 3 months leading up to the final will revision. I stared at the name, Grant Morrow, and the memory clicked, sharp, cold, and entirely satisfying. He's lying, I told Rowan instantly. Samuel fired him about 10 years ago. Grant was stealing antique silverware from the house. There's a police report, a formal dismissal, everything. Grant Morrow wasn't a credible witness. He was a disgruntled opportunist with a clear motive for revenge. Judge Archer's decision had left a black mark on his employment history, making it nearly impossible for him to secure decent work since Rowan was cautious. We can destroy him on the stand. Maddie, we have the proof. But destroying a character witness, even a compromised one, can look like bullying to a jury. It can make us look like the Hartleys, trying to stamp out anyone who speaks against us. It was a delicate ethical line, and for the first time, I saw my grandfather's influence directly guiding my defense. The truth must be handled justly, not vengefully. The external pressure ramped up. Just as we finalized our rebuttal to Grant Morrow, a meticulously crafted leak appeared in the local press, detailed bank statements showing large, regular transfers from Samuel's personal account to Elaine Hartley over a span of 15 years. It was an undeniable pattern of financial support. The leak instantly torpedoed the Hartleys' image of the abandoned daughter, proving she had continued to benefit from her father's wealth even while neglecting him. I wanted to use the leak immediately, to make it the centerpiece of our opening argument. No, Rowan warned, her voice firm. We play this clean, Maddie. We don't need to fight their version of the truth with our own smear campaign. If you transform the courtroom into a stage for mutual humiliation, you inadvertently become another version of them. You prove Samuel's final decision was based on emotion, not principle. Which do you want? Justice or retaliation? It was the ultimate test. I could taste the satisfaction of publicly shaming Elaine with her own bank records. But Samuel had taught me that integrity was the higher victory. I swallowed the impulse for quick revenge and focused on his truth. Then, 48 hours before jury selection, an unexpected lifeline dropped from the sky. I received a cryptic text message. Need to meet. Urgent. Liam. Liam Hartley, my half-brother. Elaine's son from her second marriage to Daniel. He was about 24, a recent college graduate, and someone I barely knew, as he was usually whisked away on Daniel's political tours. We met at a quiet, neutral coffee shop on the edge of town. Liam looked terrified, his hands trembling around his mug. He confessed he couldn't keep quiet. Mom asked me multiple times to sign affidavits, saying I saw you isolate Grandpa at Silvercrest, he whispered, glancing nervously at the door. She told me exactly what to write. I never signed, but she kept pushing. He admitted that for years. He had implicitly believed my mother's narrative, that I was the strange, older, greedy half-sister who had somehow alienated Samuel. But everything changed after the funeral. He said he was going through the old family mailbox at their Riversend Heights mansion, looking for old insurance papers, when he found a stash of letters from Samuel to Elaine. They were sealed, unopened, and dated across 10 years. They were all invitations, Liam said, his voice cracking. Invitations to come to Silvercrest, to bring me, to spend Christmas. He was trying to reconcile, trying to offer Mom shares in the community trust he set up for children. Liam pushed a folded paper across the table, a copy of one of the letters. She never opened them. She cut him off, not the other way around. This was gold. This was unassailable. Physical proof that Elaine's tearful testimony about her beloved, distant father was a complete fabrication. She was not the victim of neglect. She was the perpetrator of intentional, repeated estrangement. Rowan, once skeptical of my family's drama, immediately saw the tactical genius of this. Liam, you could be our unexpected star witness, but if you take the stand, you face your mother, your father, and a room full of cameras. You cannot back down. You will be confirming your mother committed perjury. Liam took a long, shuddering breath. I know, but I also know Grandpa was a good man. I can't let them win this lie just to protect Mom's image. The decision was made. That night, the night before the trial was set to begin, I sat alone in my living room. I finally pulled out the small, brown envelope Maureen had given me from Samuel, the one he said to open only when they came back for what they threw away. The time was now. They had come back, armed with lies, to steal the truth. My hands were surprisingly steady as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 items, a handwritten letter and a small, innocuous USB flash drive. I read the letter first. It was Samuel's precise, looping script, dated 6 months before he died. It was a message of love and justification, explaining why he had to take this final, drastic legal step, knowing the storm it would unleash. Then, I picked up the USB drive. It was labeled simply, "The Full Story." I plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained one single, massive file, a high-quality video and audio recording. I opened it, and the screen illuminated with the familiar wood-paneled study at Silvercrest. Samuel was there, looking directly into the camera, ready to tell the story my parents had tried to bury forever, I knew, with a sudden, electrifying certainty that the contents of this tiny drive were powerful enough to not only win the case, but to change the entire narrative and end the fight on Samuel's terms. The opening of the civil trial felt less like a solemn legal proceeding and more like the premiere of a heavily advertised reality show. Courtroom number 3 was overflowing. Every seat in the gallery was taken. The press rows were sardine-packed, and outside, the courthouse steps were filled with trucks live-streaming the proceedings to tens of thousands of viewers across the state, eager for the latest twist in the Archer estate drama. I sat at the defense table, feeling the heat of every eye, but keeping my focus locked on the neutral face of Judge Jeremiah Cole. Carter Lowell began with a performance worthy of an Emmy. He delivered his opening statement with the smooth, mournful cadence of a preacher. "This is not a case about money, ladies and gentlemen," he intoned, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "It is a case about betrayal, about a vulnerable, elderly father, Judge Samuel Archer, who was isolated by a greedy granddaughter, a granddaughter who, ironically, used her position as a prosecutor in this very county to gain access, to gain influence, and to rewrite a loving family's legacy for her own $14 million profit. He painted me as a legal predator, a heartless professional who weaponized my training against the only 2 people left who truly cared about Samuel. It was manipulative, but effective. He ended by gesturing towards Elaine and Daniel, who wore expressions of exquisite, dignified heartbreak. The Hartleys' case relied almost entirely on emotional testimony designed to elicit pity. Elaine Hartley was the first to take the stand, and she delivered her testimony like a classically trained actress. She cried before Carter even finished his first question. "I loved my father," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes. "But he was always distant, always obsessed with his work. I watched my daughter, Madeline, being shipped off to his home, and I was powerless. He kept us apart." She spoke of the painful distance and the unbearable loneliness of being excluded from his life, spinning a tale of a loving daughter marginalized by a cold, judgmental father and a conniving granddaughter. Every gesture was perfect, every pause timed to maximize the audience's sympathy. Rowan Blake was brilliant in her restraint. She barely objected. She let Elaine talk, allowing the narrative to fully take root, knowing that a lie that is fully told is a lie that can be completely exposed. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she didn't attack. She simply asked small, clinically precise questions about dates, times, and specific details of the alleged powerless moments. "Mrs. Hartley, can you confirm the year you last had an unprompted dinner with your father? Can you confirm the precise date of the last time you initiated a call to the Silvercrest residence?" The questions seemed trivial, yet they subtly underlined the massive factual holes in her tearful narrative, holes Rowan would circle back to later. Next up was Carter's supposed star witness, Grant Morrow, the disgruntled former maintenance man. Grant, visibly nervous but clearly coached, confidently spun his lie. He painted a picture of a judge in steady decline. "He'd call me Daniel sometimes," Grant claimed, "and I saw him signing checks and receipts without even looking, especially after Miss Hart started taking him to that medical place. He seemed confused, forgetting names, forgetting he even owned the Silvercrest house." His testimony was designed to create doubt about Samuel's testamentary capacity at the critical time the will was changed. Rowan's cross-examination of Grant was quiet, surgical, and brutal. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the facts. She produced his formal letter of termination and the report from the Silvercrest Sheriff's Department regarding the stolen property. "Mr. Morrow," Rowan asked, her tone flat, "isn't it true that Judge Archer discharged you in 2013 for the theft of several valuable, antique silver pieces from his study?" Grant's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He was cornered. "Yes," he muttered, "but that doesn't change what I saw." Rowan calmly continued, "And isn't it true that the stain on your employment record resulting from that theft has made it difficult for you to secure stable employment for the last 10 years? Grant was forced to admit the personal enmity he held towards the deceased. He confessed to the revenge motive. However, Carter Lowell immediately jumped up for redirection, masterfully minimizing the damage. "Your Honor, a man's bitterness over an unjust firing, which we dispute, doesn't change the fact that he was an eyewitness. Just because the witness has animosity doesn't mean everything he saw was wrong." The maneuver worked. The room remained suspended in doubt. The jury had heard the motive for revenge, but they had also heard testimony that sounded credible enough to raise a doubt about Samuel's mind. The needle hadn't entirely swung to my side. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the stand, acutely aware of the challenging, hopeful, and deeply judgmental gazes of my parents fixed on me. They were waiting for me to falter, to break down under the pressure. I chose to tell the truth, but through Samuel's lens, I didn't dwell on the money. I spoke about the 22 years of my life in Silvercrest. I recounted the late-night sessions at the old wooden table, discussing the human element of legal precedent. I submitted emails Samuel had sent me at 1 a.m, asking my opinion on an old case from the 70s. I described his decision to enroll himself in the halcyon cognitive checks, not because he was sick, but because he believed absolute mental integrity was required of a former judge, even in retirement. I painted him as a man of principle, fiercely in control of his faculties until the very end. Carter tried to tear me down during cross-examination. focusing on the 3-decade estrangement. "Ms. Hart," he pressed, standing too close. "You used the undeniable physical and emotional distance between your grandfather and his only daughter to insert yourself into the center of his life and subsequently, his will. You occupied the space of the daughter, didn't you?" My breath hitched, but my voice was steady. I channeled Samuel's lesson on accountability. "Mr. Lowell," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "The distance between Judge Archer and his daughter was not created by me. It was built by her. It was constructed with every letter she never opened, every phone call she never returned, and every moment she chose her political image over her father. I did not steal her place. She abandoned it." A stunned, thick silence descended on the courtroom, lasting maybe 3 seconds, but feeling like an eternity. Judge Cole called for a recess. As the courtroom cleared out and Rowan and I gathered our notes, Elaine materialized suddenly by the defense table. She leaned in, her eyes wide, the stage tears gone, replaced by pure, desperate fury. "You think you're winning, Maddie?" she hissed, barely moving her lips. "I know about that USB. I know what you have, and trust me, there are things on there that you do not want the public to see. We have our own copy of the whole story. Darling, you try to play the truth card, and we'll show them all the dirt you thought you buried. Don't push it." She straightened up and walked away, a terrifying, confident smirk replacing the fear. I froze, my blood turning to ice. How did she know about the USB? How did she know what Samuel had given me? It was a hidden threat, a final, chilling card that meant the Hartleys had been playing an even deeper, more dangerous game than we had realized. The moment Elaine uttered the threat about the USB, the urgency of the case escalated from a legal dispute to a desperate race for the truth. We were barely back in the private conference room when Rowan slid a piece of paper across the table, her expression grim. "They just filed this with the clerk. Newly discovered evidence." It was an email printout, ostensibly from me to Maureen Clay, dated shortly after Samuel's mild stroke. The key sentence was highlighted. "We need to ensure Grandpa doesn't sign anything without my direct involvement. It is vital that we control the process now." The sentence was devastating. It twisted my concern into cold, calculated control, supporting the Hartleys' entire narrative of undue influence. I stared at the printout, recognizing the framework of the email, but recoiling from the central sentence. "That's not what I wrote," I insisted, my voice tight. The original email addressed an attempted scam. Samuel had a friend who was nearly fleeced by a financial broker, and I told Maureen we needed to shield him from unsolicited approaches. It was about predatory strangers, not about me controlling his will. "The metadata will tell the tale," Rowan stated, already filing an emergency motion. "We're going to ask Judge Cole for a forensic analysis of the file's integrity." Judge Cole, clearly disturbed by the escalating accusations, agreed immediately, granting us a temporary halt to the afternoon session while his court technology expert, a man named Mr. Denton, analyzed the file's origins. The wait was agonizing, punctuated only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the quiet ticking of the clock. Then, the conference room door opened and Liam Hartley slipped inside, looking pale and resolute. "I need to talk to you," he whispered, pushing a thick stack of printed papers toward Rowan. "It's about that email. I know how they got it, and I know who changed it." He revealed that Elaine, through the aggressive PR firm, had tasked him, using his college-level hacking knowledge, to gain access to a very old, semi-dormant email account belonging to Maureen Clay from before she upgraded her security. Elaine had instructed him to download everything related to Samuel's will, but the worst part was in the printed chats he provided. The printouts showed a frantic exchange between Elaine and Liam, outlining exactly how she directed him to tweak a few phrases in the retrieved email to show the court what a greedy, controlling little monster your half-sister really is. The evidence of my parents' active manipulation was now staring us in the face, time-stamped and documented by their own coerced ally. 15 minutes later, Mr. Denton, the court tech expert, walked into the room with his report. His findings were irrefutable. The email provided by the plaintiffs was a modified copy. The file's metadata showed it had been accessed and edited on a device registered to Liam Hartley. But, and this was the crucial blow, the final transmission to Carter Lowell's office originated from an IP address directly traceable to the Riversend offices of the Hartley's PR firm. The entire sequence was a meticulous, orchestrated fraud. Liam was immediately called to the stand. He was trembling, but his determination held. He told the court everything: his mother's command, the hacking of the old account, the instruction to modify the email to frame me, and the subsequent discovery of Samuel's unopened letters that finally solidified his decision to come clean. Elaine erupted. She leaped to her feet, screaming, "He's lying! She poisoned him! And now she's turned my own son against me! Madeline paid him off!" Her outburst was quickly gavelled down by Judge Cole, but the damage to her credibility was total. The printed chat logs, however, spoke louder than her furious denial. The jury now had clear evidence of the plaintiff's bad faith and fabrication of evidence, just when the momentum seemed to be entirely on our side. Carter Lowell, fighting for his life, executed a brilliant, desperate parry. He rose and presented the court with a final piece of ethical evidence. It was a short video clip. The video showed a younger me, barely 21, in a heated, obviously emotional argument with Samuel in his study. My voice was raised, agitated. I was passionately insisting that he should liquidate a significant portion of his assets, perhaps 40%, to avoid future tax complications and maximize our family's security. The clip cut off abruptly just as I said, "You must sell it now, or we lose it all." The implication was clear. I was coercing my elderly grandfather to sell his legacy for my own financial gain. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was exactly what Elaine had been threatening. This was their final, poisonous piece of dirt. "Your Honor," Carter announced, "this footage, which we legally obtained, shows that Ms. Hart's concern for her grandfather's well-being was, in fact, thinly veiled coercion, driven by the desire to control his money and his tax planning." The atmosphere in the courtroom switched instantly from certainty to chaos. The jury was leaning back, confusion written all over their faces. This was the moment for the USB. During a swift, tense consultation in the conference room, I handed the flash drive to Rowan. "Play the full video," I urged. "It's the only way." Rowan opened the file on her laptop. She played the segment presented by Carter. Then, she let the original footage continue. The full, unedited video showed my argument continuing for another 3 minutes. I was not arguing for tax evasion. I was arguing against it. I insisted that he should keep the money liquid and transparent, ready for taxation, refusing his suggestion that we explore a complicated offshore trust that his friend had used. "Grandpa," I insisted, my younger self looking fierce and uncompromising, "I won't be party to any scheme that looks like tax avoidance. The money is not worth compromising the name Archer." The video then showed Samuel chuckling deeply, his face softening. He reached out and touched my arm. "Exactly. Maddie, exactly the right answer." He confessed that he had set up the scenario, the aggressive financial proposal, to test my ethical mettle. "You passed, kid," he said in the video, smiling at the camera that had been recording the entire time. "You always choose the principled path. That's why the legacy is safe with you." Rowan snapped the laptop shut. The air was charged with triumph. The video was Samuel's final, perfect piece of evidence, recorded specifically to preempt the very attack Carter had just launched. Rowan marched back into the courtroom and addressed Judge Cole, her voice ringing with clear authority. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to enter the full, unedited video recording from the USB drive into evidence and to present it in its entirety at the start of tomorrow's session. We have the proof that the plaintiff's last piece of evidence was a deliberately and maliciously edited fabrication." Judge Cole looked directly at the stunned, ashen faces of Elaine and Daniel. He slammed his gavel down. Permission granted. This court has heard enough of half-truths. His voice was iron. The trial is adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, we will hear the rest of the stories that were only half told. The spectators buzzed with feverish excitement. Sensing that the final decisive blow was about to be delivered, the courtroom had become a pressure cooker, and the next morning would be the explosive release. The following morning, courtroom number 3 was an absolute spectacle. News of the fabricated email and Liam Hartley's dramatic testimony had spread like wildfire overnight, turning the trial into the highest-rated legal drama in the state. Spectators, reporters, and legal students were packed shoulder to shoulder. The moment Judge Cole took the bench, the entire room hushed, anticipating the promised climax. Rowan Blake did not waste a second. She launched directly into the presentation of the USB contents. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the full, unedited video of my 21-year-old self, arguing passionately with Samuel, filled the screen. The segment that Carter had so cleverly used to suggest coercion was shown, followed immediately by the continuation. The jury watched as I emphatically rejected the tax avoidance scheme, my voice ringing with the principles Samuel had taught me. Then, they saw Samuel's warm smile and heard his words, recorded for posterity. "You passed, kid. You always choose the principled path. That's why the legacy is safe with you." The impact was immediate and devastating. The heart of the Hartleys' claim, that I was a ruthless manipulator obsessed with money, was demolished by the deceased himself. Rowan followed up with a methodical presentation of the correspondence files. She projected the chain of emails Samuel had sent to Elaine over many years. Heartfelt invitations to Silvercrest, carefully planned birthday messages, and most painfully, his proposal to establish a large scholarship fund in both my name and my mother's name to encourage reconciliation. She then showed the corresponding email accounts for Elaine. Only terse replies concerning financial transfers or, more often, no reply at all. The evidence showed a father desperately reaching out to a daughter who only answered when money was mentioned. The final blow, the one Samuel had intended as the ultimate protection of his truth, was delivered next. "Your Honor," Rowan requested, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "The defense now requests permission to play a final audio file from the deceased's private archives." The file was a recording of a phone call between Samuel and Judge Cole, made only 3 months before Samuel's passing. Samuel's voice, clear and firm, filled the courtroom speakers. "Jeremiah," Samuel said on the recording, "I'm calling you not as a peer, but as a witness. If, after I'm gone, my daughter and her husband attempt to dismantle my final wishes, I want the full truth of how my daughter chose currency over kinship to be presented before the court. I want no more half-truths. I want the record to be clear, not for retribution, but for accountability." Judge Cole listened to his own voice on the recording, confirming the call had taken place, and he looked across the courtroom, his expression somber. He explained to the jury that at the time of the call, he had, out of professional duty, advised Samuel to ensure all his documentation was meticulously preserved. Today, he had the solemn duty to honor that advice. Elaine Hartley finally broke. She let out a guttural, wounded sound and lunged at Daniel. Clawing at his arm, she screamed. "It was the stress, the pressure. I just wanted my fair share." Daniel remained silent, his face a mask of defeat. But then, in a soft, barely audible voice, he confessed to Judge Cole. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his political career dissolving in a single sentence. "I knew the truth. I knew they were estranged, but I told Elaine to sue. I was afraid of losing the campaign funding and the life we had. It was a confession born of self-preservation, but it was a confession nonetheless." The court recessed for the final time. After an agonizing wait that lasted nearly 3 hours, Judge Cole returned. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the air conditioning hum. He delivered the verdict with the weight of the 30 years he had spent on the bench. He found Samuel Archer's will to be entirely valid, ruling that all claims of diminished capacity or undue influence were not only unsubstantiated but contradicted by overwhelming evidence. He dismissed all charges against me, ordering the Hartleys to bear the entirety of the court costs and pay a substantial, punitive fine to me for defamation and the intentional manipulation of evidence. Then, he dropped a final, surprising detail. Furthermore, Judge Cole stated, looking at me, Judge Archer inserted a final, specific clause, effective only if this lawsuit was filed. A significant portion of the estate has now been automatically and irrevocably transferred into the Silvercrest Scholarship Fund to provide legal education assistance for students who come from backgrounds of emotional or familial abandonment. It was Samuel's final, perfect act of justice, turning his family's betrayal into protection for other vulnerable young people. The money would now serve principle, not greed. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight felt too bright, and the throng of reporters rushed toward me. Elaine grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading, "Maddie, please, I'm still your mother. Don't you think there's a way back?" I gently detached my arm, looking at her with a calm clarity I had never possessed before this trial. The person who gave birth to me isn't always the person who raised me when I fell. Grandpa did that. I don't owe either of you anything anymore. And I walked away, not looking back at the defeated spectacle of my parents. I stopped on the courthouse steps, turning to face the wall of cameras. This time, I spoke first. I didn't want the Hartley's PR machine to spin the ending. I thanked Rowan Blake and the court for upholding the truth, and then I announced my resignation from the Northgate DA's office. I had accepted an invitation to join the Westlake Judicial Integrity Council, a position dedicated to overseeing prosecutorial ethics. The spotlight on my life would remain, but I was no longer running from it. I had chosen a path not defined by an inherited fortune, but by the principle of justice Samuel had instilled in me. I turned and walked down the courthouse steps, a prosecutor who had just won the greatest moral trial of her life, ready to finally step out of my family's shadow and into my own legacy. Thank you so much for listening to this intense journey of legacy and revenge. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Share your thoughts on Maddie's final choice, and make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit the hype button to help get this story heard by more people.